Sigmund Freud is a superhero of scholarship. People say that his influence can be compared to the influence of William Shakespeare and Jesus Christ. He's like the Hulk. He's unavoidable. He's everywhere. There's even an action figure of Sigmund Freud. And of course, he's the subject of numerous memes. Nowadays, though, Sigmund Freud is on the couch. What does it mean to say that someone is on the couch? Well, it's a reference to Sigmund Freud's invention, psychoanalysis, that he came up with in Vienna, Austria. And you can see Freud's famous carpet there that he would have his patients lay on. And in this picture, Freud himself is on the couch and he's being studied by modern scholars. And modern scholars have decided that Sigmund Freud is really not all that accurate. Some people even call him Sigmund Fraud. One of the problems is science. And this is a screen cap of the Wikipedia page on Freud. Once science stepped in and people started measuring whether or not Freud's approach actually worked. You know, having someone lie on a couch and free associate for 50 minutes and the psychoanalyst sits behind them and they don't make eye contact. That whole process of Freudian psychoanalysis, does it work? If you took 100 people with psychological problems and had them undergo Freudian psychoanalysis, would they get better? Or if you took 100 people who took other approaches to psychological problems, would those people get better? And the simple truth is that scientific study shows that psychoanalysis is not all that successful, that people often don't get better through Freudian psychoanalysis. And so today, strict Freudian psychoanalysis is relatively rare. Most therapists don't practice it. They practice other methods of therapy. And there are other problems. Freud's theories about schizophrenia, for example, Freud blamed, guess who? The mother. It's all the mother's fault. The mother was not loving enough, or she was too loving, and so she turned her child into a schizophrenic. Now we know that schizophrenia has a biological basis. Homosexuality. Freud was wrong about that. And bad theories about what makes a homosexual did a lot of damage to homosexual people throughout the 20th century. Psychologists and psychiatrists did terrible things to homosexual people based on these bad theories. So, unfortunately, Freud's theories don't hold up all that well to science. And there's another problem. Women. Many people assess Freud's theories as misogynist. Misogynist means anti-woman. Freud said that all women suffer from penis envy, that women are out there wishing that they had penises. Freud said that women can overcome their penis envy by being pregnant with a male baby because the male has a penis. So there's lots of reasons why a lot of women think that Freud is not such a great scholar. And this is just one of many books that have come out in recent years that basically rake Freud over the coals and tear him apart. And this particular book talks about Freud as an individual, and it says that he was very personally ambitious. He wanted to be a great man. He wanted to change Western civilization, and he did. Freud is still hugely influential. If you study culture in any form, books, movies, songs, folktales, spells, magic, you're absolutely going to find yourself using Freudian symbolism. And when it comes to magic, the most obvious object that lends itself to Freudian analysis is the magic wand. In Freudian analysis, the magic wand is always going to be a phallic symbol, that is a reference to a penis. So even though Freud himself was a hyper-ambitious, often dishonest, often quite cruel person, he's still highly influential. And this is a short summary of the previously shown book that talks about how Freud was cruel, that he never cured anybody, that he was a cokehead, he liked to use cocaine, and that he actually accepted money to promote cocaine in advertisements. And here are some quotes from various publications, the New Yorker, Esquire, etc., Publishers Weekly, talking about how good this book is. So in other words, this isn't just some random book. This is a book that's been very well received, that takes Freud down. So am I telling you that we need to completely reject Sigmund Freud? Absolutely not. I think in some areas, yes. I think Freud's ideas about women, personally, I find them disgusting and often incorrect. His ideas about what makes for schizophrenia, his psychoanalysis method, all of these things can be criticized. But I still think that Freud has something to offer anyone who studies folklore, and shaman, witches, and magic certainly falls under the scholarly umbrella of folklore. And I just want to mention an American folklorist named Vance Randolph. Vance Randolph was a folklorist who was born in more or less an urban setting. His dad was a lawyer and his mother was a teacher, and he was very privileged. But even though he was economically and culturally privileged, Vance Randolph decided to go to the Ozark Mountains. And here's a pencil sketch of Vance Randolph. And this, according to Google, is a photograph of the Ozark Mountains, which actually looks a little bit like the mountains in Wanacue and Ringwood in the northern part of our state of New Jersey, Sussex County. So the folks who are living in the Ozark Mountains are, this is back in the 20th century, they're what we would call hillbillies. They're relatively poor, they're relatively rural, and this is in the days before the internet, and so they're living in a kind of remote setting. And this is Vance Randolph traveling to his job as a folklorist in the Ozark Mountains. And here are the kind of folks that Vance Randolph studied. They're living in a house that they built themselves out of raw lumber, and they're playing their guitars and their fiddles. And there's Vance Randolph on the porch recording them. And here's another one of Vance Randolph's subjects playing his old style fiddle. And here's another Vance Randolph subject. And here's another one of the people that Vance Randolph studied. And here are some Ozark hillbillies. How would you feel if you were walking through the woods and you ran into these guys? And here's some more Vance Randolph's subjects. So based on Vance Randolph's research into the Ozark Mountain people, and again, this is Vance Randolph is a guy who came from an urban setting, white collar parents, educated guy, and he went off to live with these hillbillies, and he asked them to tell him their folklore. And this is what Vance Randolph discovered. When it was a mixed crowd, so you've got a bunch of Ozark hillbillies sitting in a log hut telling folk tales. If it's a mixed crowd, men, women, children, the folk tale is told like this. There was once a king who had a beautiful daughter, and he called a contest, and he said, "You must play music to win my daughter. And if your music is incredibly beautiful, you get to marry my daughter, the princess. And if I don't like your music, I'm going to break your flute." And what would Sigmund Freud say? Sigmund Freud would say that that flute is a phallic symbol, and that that folktale is speaking in terms of symbols. Now listen to this. When Vance Randolph was sitting in a room where it was just men, no women present, no children present, this is how they would tell the folktale. There was once a king who had a beautiful daughter, contest, etc. If I don't like your music, I'm going to chop off your penis. So in this book, Pissing in the Snow, Vance Randolph shows that Freudian symbolism has value because the folk themselves speak in terms of symbols. And here's a screen cap of a book that Vance Randolph published, or a little bit of an excerpt of Vance Randolph's book. And you see there's two different versions of a bragging song. If you're in mixed company, you say "Fill, bowl, fill." And if you're in company of only men, then you say "I had sex with the woman." So in other words, what I'm saying here is that yes, Freud made many errors, and yes, Freud was very imperfect. But I do think that his symbolism is valuable for anyone who studies folklore. And I would say something very similar about Sir James Frazer. Nowadays, people, serious scholars, look at Sir James Frazer as an antique. And much of his scholarship has been rejected. But there is one contribution of Frazer's scholarship that has not been rejected, and that is his structure of magic, that all magic all over the world has two formats. The homeopathic magic that is based on two things being similar. And for that we have the voodoo doll. If you want to hurt someone, you make a doll that looks like that person and you hurt the doll. And because the doll looks like the person will be hurt. That's homeopathic magic. If two things look alike, they have an impact on each other. And I'll give you another example, jaundice. When people's liver is failing, like if someone has drunk alcohol all their life and their liver starts to fail, their skin turns green or yellow. And people would think that they could cure jaundice by doing something with the feathers of a yellow bird. So all around the world, we see people trying to cure jaundice with yellow bird feathers. And the other format of magic is contagious magic. If one thing has touched another thing, the one thing has power over the other thing. And people who believe in this contagious magic will not allow their, quote, enemies, unquote, to have any contact with their hair or nails. Like if they go to the barber to get their hair cut, they will take their hair home and burn it because they don't want their enemies to get a hold of their hair or their clipped fingernails. And there are people who believe this today. Okay, so next we're going to talk about the writings of a guy named Michael Shermer. And Michael Shermer is part of a group called the New Atheists. The new atheists started appearing on the cultural scene in the early 2000s. Many of them were inspired by 9/11, the 9/11 terror attacks, the planes flying into the Twin Towers, Pennsylvania, and the Pentagon. And the reason 9/11 inspired them was because they said this attack was caused by religion, and religion is bad, and we need to get rid of religion. The new atheists don't just condemn religion. They condemn belief in anything that is not part of material reality. What do I mean by material reality? I mean what you can see, smell, touch, hear, and taste. If you can't experience something through your senses, it does not exist. God does not exist. ESP does not exist. Synchronicity does not exist. Magic does not exist. All these beliefs are stupid. So any kind of supernatural belief, if you believe in ghosts, you're stupid, you need to be educated. If you believe in any kind of supernatural being, if you believe that you can communicate with the dead, if you believe in Ouija boards, if you believe in tarot cards, if you believe in astrology, you're just stupid. Any of these beliefs, Bigfoot, Loch Ness Monster, etc. These new atheists who came on the scene in the early 2000s insist that they are more intelligent than people who believe in God. They are more intelligent than people who believe in magic or anything like that. Religion is a phase a species goes through when it evolves enough intelligence to ask profound questions, but not enough to answer them. So in other words, we're getting back to that Fraserian idea of civilizational phases, that the primitive people, the backward people, are the people who believe in God, and the smart people, the evolved people, the intelligent people, are people who are atheists. And this symbol shows you exactly how the new atheists communicate this idea. When we were primitive and backward and ape-like, we had religion. But when we evolved to our modern, clear-thinking, intelligent selves, we throw religion in the garbage where it belongs. And you may ask why, and a student asked this question, why? Why is it so important to talk about how smart you are if you're an atheist and how stupid you are if you believe in God? Why go public with that? And I just want to mention these three guys, and I hope you recognize them. These are all men who are deeply interested in power. They want power. They want to be the one telling other people what to do and what to think and where to go. And of course, these three men are Adolf Hitler, Joseph Stalin, and Mao Zedong. And Hitler sparked World War II. Of course, we know that he murdered 6 million Jews, perhaps 5 million non-Jews in concentration camps, and tens of millions of people died in World War II. Stalin was the leader of Soviet Russia. He's responsible for tens of millions of deaths. Mao Zedong established communism in China. One estimate of the number of deaths he caused is close to 80 million. And this is Pol Pot in Cambodia. We all know that the Nazis persecuted Jews. So this is one religion that has been persecuted. A lot of people don't know that the Nazis also persecuted Christians. I'm Polish, I'm very aware of this. This is a photograph. The online caption says that there were 2,500 Polish Catholic priests in Dachau in one concentration camp. Almost 20% of Polish priests were murdered by the Nazis. And this is a Russian Orthodox Christian cleric being put on trial by the communists in Russia. Many, many Christians in the Soviet Empire were persecuted, and I know of this personally because I had family members who were believing Christians who were persecuted by the communists. And in Cambodia, the Buddhist monks were murdered and tortured by Pol Pot's regime. And in China, Tibetan Buddhist monks are murdered and tortured. And today in China, Uyghurs who are Muslims are sent to concentration camps. So what's my larger point here? I'm mentioning the persecution of people of religious faith by people who are interested in power for this reason. Religious faith exercises power over people. It exercises power over what they believe and how they act. And when someone else wants power, wants to be the powerful person who's telling other people what to do and how to behave, they will try to lessen the power of religion because they want power themselves. And I'm not saying that the new atheists are Hitler or Stalin, not at all. I'm saying that the one thing that all these people have in common, including religious leaders themselves, I mean, religious leaders themselves want power, is that religious belief, or any belief, including belief in witchcraft and magic, is power. It's exercising power over what people think and how people behave. And someone else comes along and wants to exercise power, and they're going to try and knock down religion. And these new atheists want power. And they want power over what you think and how you behave. And so the new atheists made their splash by publishing numerous books. Christopher Hitchens, who died a few years back of cancer, wrote a book called God is Not Great: How Religion Poisons Everything. And Christopher Hitchens is obviously tweaking Islam in the title of his book, because Allahu Akbar, meaning Allah is the greatest, is a frequently repeated phrase among Muslims, and Allahu Akbar again means Allah is the greatest. And Christopher Hitchens here is saying, no, God is not great. Religion poisons everything. Richard Dawkins is a British biologist, scientist of Darwin. He promotes Darwin's theory. Richard Dawkins said that religion is like smallpox, and smallpox is one of the most devastating, deadly diseases that has ever plagued mankind. So when Richard Dawkins says that religion is like smallpox, he's saying something pretty heavy. And Sam Harris is an American. He studied neuroscience as a graduate student, and he wrote Letter to a Christian Nation, basically saying, you know, let's get rid of religion. And here are some more of the books. The new atheists are not just saying that religion is bad. They're also promoting their own point of view. And their own point of view is that science and atheism are going to create a better tomorrow, and the world will be a better place, and we will get rid of all these stupid, rotten things that we've done in the past because we're going to be better people. And you can see the subtitles there on the Shermer book on the left. How science and reason are leading humanity towards truth, justice, and freedom. Steven Pinker. The case for reason, science, humanism. Humanism is another word for atheism. And progress. The better angels of our nature. We're going to become better people through science. So the new atheists are not just saying that religion is bad. They are contrasting religion and science and saying that science is good and science is going to be the salvation of humanity, and if we can all just become believers in science, everything's going to be better. As you might imagine, the new atheists can be really obnoxious, because they're almost like religious people. It's like they're constantly handing out their pamphlets and saying, be like me, think like me. If you're not like me, you're not a cool person. And I found this really funny article. 10 times atheists are more annoying than a religious person. Like, we think of religious people as being annoying because they're always trying to peddle their ideas. But the atheists, they can be pretty darn annoying too. And the first complaint is that the atheists are always posting these memes of guys with beards. Real soldiers don't use guns and swords, intelligence and wisdom. Join me in the battle against organized religion. Hey, dude. Hey, bro. I'm an atheist and I'm intelligent and you're religious and you're stupid. Atheists spend more time yelling at others about their beliefs than any religious person. Yeah, I think that's probably true. And then going around and writing on the dollar bill, in atheism we trust. Yeah, okay. Um, Science, many scientists have said stop contrasting science with religion. A lot of scientists are religious. And the atheists keep insisting we're the truly scientific ones and we're going to save the world through science. And this constant business of telling people, that you're better than they are because you're an atheist. Well, Michael Shermer is one of these new atheists, and this is the Wikipedia page for Michael Shermer. And it tells you a little bit about his life. Michael Shermer was born, I think, in 1954, so he's about 60 plus years old right now. When he was a young man, he says he was a Christian. And he was attending college, and he met some professors and some smart people, and he would stay up all night with them, and he learned about anthropology, and he learned that people in other countries believe other things. And so he decided religion cannot be true, because if it were true, we would all believe the same thing. And then his girlfriend, Maureen, was in a car accident, and she became paraplegic. And Shermer says he visited her in the hospital and he was very sad and he thought about how her body had been shattered, and he would get down on his knees and he would bow his head and say, "Oh God, please cure Maureen. Please make it so that Maureen is not a paraplegic." And God did not cure Maureen. And so then Michael Shermer decided there is no God. And here's an article about something rather interesting that happened to Michael Shermer. He took up competitive bicycle racing. And he used to race his bicycle from coast to coast, from the Pacific to the Atlantic. And he engaged in a lot of iffy practices. And one of the iffy practices was giving himself enemas. And if you give yourself an enema, you often end up dehydrated, like your body doesn't have enough water. And if you're dehydrated, you can begin to hallucinate. And not only is he dehydrated, but he's also riding his bike from the Pacific to the Atlantic. So he's really putting his body under a lot of stress. So at one point in the 1980s, he was involved in something called the Race Across America. And he's riding his bicycle and he's dehydrated and he started to hallucinate. And he became convinced that he had been kidnapped by space aliens. And as a matter of fact, on camera, he told the media that he had been kidnapped by space aliens. And a lot of us, frankly, would be rather embarrassed if we realized that we had said publicly to the media that we had been kidnapped by space aliens. But, Shermer decided he was going to build a career around this. And here is the rest of the story, that how he told the camera crew that he had been kidnapped by space aliens. He decided to become a professional atheist. And he decided to spend his life telling other people that belief in anything that you cannot see, smell, taste, hear, touch, anything that you cannot experience through your five senses does not exist. Religious belief is wrong, it's stupid, it's foolish, it's destructive. Belief in psychic abilities is wrong, is stupid, is foolish, is destructive. Belief in magic, belief in anything other than what you can see, taste, or feel is really bad. And that's his entire career. That's what he does for a living. He appears on television. He publishes in Scientific American. He appears in debates. And something interesting happened to Shermer, Mr. Atheist, a few years back. He got married, I think, for the third time, and his wife had I think it was a radio that belonged to her grandfather, and the radio had stopped working, and after they got married, all of a sudden one day, as if by magic, the radio started working again, and his new bride became convinced that the radio working was a sign from her dead grandfather. And Shermer published an article about that, about how he met this woman and he fell in love with her and he loved her and he married her, and she had her grandfather's radio that had not worked, and after they married, the radio miraculously started working. And Shermer said, you know, that this was a very moving experience and it meant a lot to him. And people came down on him like a pile of bricks. And they said, Michael Shermer, you're supposed to be the big atheist who doesn't believe in any kind of supernatural BS. Why are you telling us this story? So man, oh man, the atheist community is very intolerant, and it does not allow you to think things or to say things that don't fit the atheist narrative. And what I mentioned, that they had the grandfather's radio and the radio didn't work, and then after they got married, the radio started working again. That would be an example of something called synchronicity. Synchronicity was an idea proposed by Carl Jung, who was a 20th century Swiss psychologist, and he was very spiritual. He was really into the spiritual side of life. And Jung said that when two things that appear to be unconnected come together in what appears to be a meaningful coincidence, that's synchronicity. And as an example of synchronicity, you wake up in the morning and you're all of a sudden thinking about a friend who you knew in school who you haven't seen in 10 years. And later that day you go to the shopping mall and you run into that friend. So you hadn't thought of that friend in the longest time, and then all of a sudden you see the friend. That's synchronicity. It's like two events that appear to be unrelated, but that come together in a way that is meaningful to the person having the experience. And of course, atheists completely reject the idea of synchronicity, so they completely reject Shermer's story about his wife's grandfather's radio. There's something else I need to mention about Michael Shermer. I'm sure you've heard of the Catholic sex abuse crisis. There's this problem where there have been priests who have sexually abused children. The atheist community also has a sex abuse crisis. At least one woman has alleged that Michael Shermer raped her, that she attended an atheist conference and that he got her drunk, and that while she was drunk, without her consent, he had sexual relations with her. And this allegation just blew up like a volcano in the atheist community, because remember, the atheist community believes that it is fixing humanity. It is repairing humanity. Religion and magic and superstition, all that miserable, rotten stuff from the past, is what has screwed humanity up. And the atheist movement is going to fix humanity. And so now what happens? But we find out that these big name atheists are treating women badly. And not just the big name atheists, but there's this whole bullying and hate culture online. And I got to tell you, I have visited the atheist discussion boards where atheists talk about women, and the things they say are revolting. They're horrific. Rape threats, death threats, mutilation threats, sadism. It's unreal. The hatred for women on these atheist discussion boards is downright scary. And here's a famous atheist female talking about how she has been sexually harassed in the new atheist movement. And you may be asking yourself, why? Why is the new atheist movement so notoriously misogynist? Why does the new atheist movement have a problem with women? Look at this chart. Worldwide, and as far as we can tell throughout history, women have been more religious, more spiritual, more interested in the paranormal than men. Again, this is something that occurs around the world, and as far as we know, it has occurred throughout time. Women are more religious, they're more spiritually expressive, they're more likely to attend church, they're more likely to read tarot cards, they're more likely to believe in ESP, they're more likely to believe in psychic mediums, and I guess the guys in the atheist movement, maybe they have a problem with that. And here's another chart, paranormal beliefs. Women are more likely to believe that houses can be haunted. Women are more likely to believe in astrology, etc. And here's a pretty good article. New study on paranormal beliefs showing women more likely to believe in supernatural phenomenon. And there you have a little chart. Women are more likely to believe in karma. Women are more likely to believe in psychics. Women are more likely to be religious. Women are more likely to practice witchcraft. Women are more likely to believe in the afterlife, etc. So let's get back to Michael Shermer. You're going to be reading an excerpt from his book, Why Smart People Believe Weird Things. I want you to notice the adjectives that he is using. Remember, Shermer is a salesman. He does this for a living. He promotes atheism for a living. So he's using his adjectives the way a salesman would use adjectives. He is flattering you because most people, statistics show that most people are not pure atheists. And by pure atheists, I mean someone who believes in material reality only. And most people are not pure atheists. Most people do believe in one of many beliefs in something beyond material reality. So he's flattering you. He's calling you smart. And he's calling the beliefs in non-material things weird. And he begins the book excerpt by defining terms. What does it mean to be smart? What does it mean to be a weird thing? And he mentions that his organization distributes materials to schools. He wants to influence future generations. He wants future generations to be atheists like him. And he says this in so many words, I want to protect the cognitive elite. What's the cognitive elite? The people who are better than you, because they can think clearly and they are atheists. He says that smart people believe weird things because their way of reaching conclusions is flawed. He says that smart people are less likely to believe weird things, but that isn't always true. Magicians argue that smart people can be fooled. Smart people are smart only in one field. So maybe you know a lot about politics, but you don't really know a lot about how the mind works. For example, he does mention gender and that women do tend to be more believers. Women are more tend to be believers. He mentions other traits that make people more or less likely to believe in weird things. He describes how smart people defend their weird beliefs. He mentions something called confirmation bias, and then he closes by talking about people who teach on university campuses and who believe in alien abduction.